The reason that we all got together tonight, this is one of many community conversations, and just wanted to say thank you. Let me be the first to thank you for being here tonight. We have all of these wonderful conversations going on in several communities throughout Maine, but this one with you and your neighbors from Cranberry Isles and across several different states in our nation tonight. You asked a lot of great questions, including questions about ferry transportation, clean energy, affordable housing, and other community priorities that you helped identify. You're going to hear from our new president. You're going to hear from Island Institute staff members working on those issues. And again, welcome any other questions you might think of as we go along. So who we are. Before we get to your questions, I'd like to just remind you real quickly that we're about to turn 40 years old. Island Institute was founded in 1983. We have over 50 people working at this organization in the areas where we can have the greatest impact. That is not necessarily the same Island Institute that it was in 1983 or 1993. And we've done a lot of work in strategic planning and multi-year planning toward the greatest impact we can have, especially targeting on measurements and impact areas for 2030. So we've done a lot of work to focus our work on these three areas. We call these our three pillars of our work. And a lot of our impacts and outcome statements, a lot of the team structure, a lot of our work in community really falls under these three categories. There are a lot more challenges facing your islands and other coastal communities, but we think that we strengthen communities and we focus our work best where we can focus on climate solutions, strengthening those resilient community coastal economies, and empowering strong leadership. How we do that? Again, lots more challenges than those three, but we're again trying to make place-based investments. And that's not just investments of financial means, but investments in our people, investment in your community people, and investments in technical assistance, where we are able to scale and accelerate what we have found works somewhere else might work in multiple islands and multiple communities. So we look for those opportunities where we can invest once or twice and then scale and repeat. That's true for climate solutions, especially where we're looking at climate solutions that kind of cross over between the working waterfront, land-based clean energy solutions, and then the greater economy. So where the blue economy and climate solutions cross, we are doing a lot of work around making sure that especially our working waterfronts are also climate ready and part of your climate ready community. Through our conversations and questions tonight, we're going to expand a little bit on some climate solutions and clean energy examples from a friend of ours here tonight. Our employees are also our friends. Sorry, Emma. Emma's going to talk to you a little bit about clean energy solutions and some questions asked from all of you in your registrations, but we'll get to that in just a second. Resilient economies. This is as much tied to climate as well as leadership. They're all very interrelated, but how we talk about resilient economies is preparing the coastal economy to adapt to what is now a very interconnected, interdependent global market. So the lobsterman from 40 years ago probably wasn't worried about the price of lobster in Japan, but we certainly think about and worry about those things now. And even though we've had a wonderful year for the lobster season, we still got to think about how all of that part of the coastal economy is interrelated. That includes not only our heritage fishing industries, but the creative economy, our response to the climate, and how those climate trades are developing on the coast, the digital economy, and other businesses and services that play a critical role in our coastal communities. The Cranberries have their own stories of people looking to grow a business or diversify their income, learning a new trade through our Compass grants, and other help from Island Institute. And I hope we can hear from some of you tonight about your own experience and how we start to build resilience in your own coastal community and coastal economy. Our last pillar is empowering leaders, strong leadership. As many of you know, you've got them in your own community. I hope Ingrid, I haven't seen Ingrid, I hope she's online tonight. Ingrid, to me, is one of those people that personifies what we mean by community leaders. You wear many hats, you do more than one job, and you play a role in perhaps a municipal leader, you volunteer for a fire department, you run your own business, and there's just so many different hats people wear. We know we've got to maximize those folks' ability to then also elevate their voices in Augusta, be represented and have leverage support from Washington, D.C. So even though it feels very local, those same voices are the voices we want to make sure we hear in our own policy making and how we represent our coastal and island communities in our policy work. Looking at the list of attendees tonight, I think there's some familiar names that we point to, and we know our own community leaders, including Kristen Howard, one of our board members, certainly a community leader from Sutton Island. Former trustee Tom Glenn, I think, is also on this call tonight, and other municipal government committee leaders. The Cranberries have no shortage of people and projects to work on. And I just want to applaud all of you and thank you for wearing yet another hat and joining us tonight. To see all of this in action, I've just dumped a lot of information at you. I invite you to visit a very new section of our website. You can see those 3 pillars across the top of the menu bar, and the Cranberries show up in every single one of these categories. This is just a screenshot of, again, our Island Fellows. The Cranberries have had 7 to date, and we hope you have many more. But mapping the milestones gives you a really good idea of how our work and our priorities have shown up in your communities and on your islands. And I encourage you to check that out just to learn more about kind of where we've been. And tonight we're going to talk a whole lot more about where we're going. Again, looking for those areas of greatest impact for 2030. I'm going to stop sharing because that's a whole lot of information. You will get copies of this as part of the follow-up. But just wanted to kind of ground our conversation in where Island Institute currently is focusing our work, because there's a lot of priorities, a lot of questions coming from islands and communities that we aren't necessarily the organization to answer or tackle, but those are certainly the 3 big areas where we're trying to do or focus most of our work. I hope those are not messages for me in the chat bar. So I want to start us off. Again, I'm going to ask a couple of questions of the folks that I've invited to join me on this conversation from the questions you provided in your registration forms. And I'm going to start with Tony Chatwin. He's our brand new president here at Island Institute, or what still feels like brand new Island Institute president. And as I call on these people, I'm going to ask them to tell them a little bit about themselves, and then I will ask them a follow-up question. Tony, who are you and where did you come from?
Yeah, well, hi, Sue, and thank you. And first, let me just thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to come and chat with us. I'm really excited about this meeting and all of the community conversations that we're having, because as Sue mentioned, I'm new to the job, 6 months on the job. We've done a lot already and the pace is pretty quick, but I still have a lot to learn. And these community conversations are really helpful for me personally to understand more directly from you what the issues are that we should be looking into and helping with as we can. So who am I? I come from far away. I was born and raised in Brazil, and am an oceanographer by training. And I spent my entire career working on fisheries related issues and helping communities that depend on fisheries resources thrive, is how I like to think about it. And I think that's one of the things that allowed my path and that of the Institute to cross. And so I I have lived in New England before. I lived in Boston. My kids were born in Boston, and then I went and lived on an island in the Caribbean, on St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, where I worked for the Nature Conservancy in marine conservation and marine planning. And then I went back to DC and worked for a grant-making organization. It's called the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and it was established by Congress to create public-private partnerships for conservation. And I created a partnership, public-private partnership called Fisheries Innovation Fund, which was to help fishing communities around the country adapt to a changing regulatory environment. And one of the most sort of impactful moments in my life, professional life, was when I heard the grantees of that program describe how receiving resources to put into practice some of the solutions that they wanted to put into practice, because they felt that that would help them improve their businesses and their livelihoods, came to DC to share their experiences. And they all said that being able to implement their solutions had given them hope in their industry. And I felt that, that is the type of impact that I want to have with my life. And so when the job at the Island Institute came up, I just thought it was, from the first time I saw the description, I thought it was a perfect match. Had to convince a lot of other people that was the case, but luckily I did, and really glad to be here. I've been in Maine for 6 months now. I'm living in Camden, and this is where I'm calling home. And I go to the office most days, loving being in sort of this maritime region, and some of the things that I was impressed by when I moved, that I didn't quite expect, not because I just didn't have an expectation, but I was really struck by the incredibly strong sense of community that exists in communities up and down the coast and on the islands here, and the amazing entrepreneurial spirit that Mainers have. I love that. I'm really impressed by that, and I feel that those are two key ingredients in being able to solve problems that are affecting the communities here on the coast. I also learned about our Island Fellows program, which I wasn't that familiar with before, and how important that program is, so that we are embedded in the communities, learning directly from the communities through the Island Fellows on what the issues are that we should be focusing on. And then I also was somewhat surprised to learn on how rapidly the Gulf of Maine is changing. It's one of the place where the oceans are warming the fastest rate, and some of the fastest rates in the world, and that is a huge issue for communities and that depend on the marine resources. And so it's given me a real sense of purpose to try to help communities here on the islands and the coast become climate ready, along the lines that Sue described it in the PowerPoint. But I wake up every day excited to work with an incredible team, and couldn't be working on a more important cause. So very happy to be here.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to get back to Tony after we ask a couple of other questions. One was directed at our own Emma Wendt. I'm going to invite Emma to say hello to you, tell you a little bit about herself and how long she's worked at Island Institute. But the question, mostly inspired by a question from Jerry Sperling of Islesboro, who asked about getting a community solar or wind power project underway on the Cranberry Isles. Emma, after you introduce yourself, could you share a little bit more about the work you've been doing on the Cranberries around clean energy?
Thanks, Sue. Hi, everybody. I am Emma Wendt. I've worked at the Island Institute for just over 3 years. I am the project lead for our climate solutions team, and my passion, absolute passion, is working on sustainability, climate, and clean energy topics. So I'm glad to have been able to move to Maine, to the mid-coast. I live in Rockland, and I'm originally from Nova Scotia, so like somewhere over there, a little bit past the Cranberry Isles. Great question from Dree. I've had the pleasure of working with her, and a couple of things about what the Cranberries are doing on clean energy. So first, you folks are leaders on this front, which is very exciting, particularly for solar on the working waterfront, which you probably already are aware of on the co-op buildings. Second, I am excited to continue to work with folks who are already underway with expanding that focus on clean energy and energy resilience. And third, there is exciting stuff to come on this front. So I will talk very briefly about each of those. So first, again, I'm assuming that if you have any interaction with the Cranberries and particularly their fishing co-op, you probably have seen beautiful pictures of their solar panels on the roofs there. We were really excited to be able to support that slightly financially, and particularly I love telling that story of how it happened, and so many people love hearing that story and learning more about it. So we wrote up a little, like a couple of pages about how exactly they made that happen. So we can really easily share that model and like the very nitty gritty about how you go and applying for grants, getting the assessment, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing that's really exciting going on that front. Second, there's a group that formed about a couple of years ago, including Dree, who asked the question, and some other folks on the Cranberries or who have connections to the Cranberries, who are specifically looking at solar and energy resilience topics for the island. And so I've had the pleasure of working with them, including to help them work with them to apply for a Department of Energy program, specifically targeted at island and remote communities to get technical assistance from national labs to help them build up their energy resilience efforts on islands and remote communities. So they applied last year. We're not selected. It was a somewhat competitive process, but we're continuing those cohorts and have been excited to work with them on considering whether to apply again for this round. This group has also been connecting with other related topics and networks, both in the region and beyond. And so I know they've been talking a lot with the Climate to Thrive, which is an MDI-based nonprofit, focusing obviously on climate and energy. And so this group has also been focused a lot on microgrids, energy resilience, et cetera, solar development, charging stations, that sort of thing. And so they've, so the Cranberries groups has been talking with them, particularly because they're all connected, right? You have a cable that connects you to MDI and then therefore the mainland, which is great to sort of foster and be part of those connections. Speaking of cables, so I've been able to visit the Cranberries twice, once early in the pandemic and again last summer for the town meeting. I was able to go out with a Versant rep, Dave Norman, who was kind enough to visit for the town meeting and share some updates about the cable replacement project, which is very exciting, and a number of other upgrades going on in the islands. So if you weren't at that town meeting, feel free to ask somebody who was, or I can catch you up later. I saw that Amy is on the line, and so we're so excited that the store at the co-op is expanding, and really excited to work with her and that whole team to make sure that it's as efficient as possible. And we're hoping to be able to support that group with things like heat pumps or other efficient and clean energy options, solar and otherwise. And finally, some exciting sort of just on the cusp type of projects. We've all seen electric cars, electric trucks are like just coming on the market, which is super exciting. If you're buying a new pickup, get in line for your F-150 or Rivian or whatever else you might be interested in. And on the water, we're starting to see some electric outpours. And we've convened a group of folks who work on the water in various capacities: harbor masters, fishermen, aquaculturists, boatyard operators, et cetera, et cetera. And in our first call in January, there were 2 lobstermen from Islesboro who were part of that conversation. And so we're excited to work with them and many others to pilot marine or clean electric marine vessels, because we would love to see that happen, both for climate resilience, getting off of dirty fossil fuels, and you've probably seen the price of gas lately, and not being subject to that volatility. So those are some of the exciting things. I know that was a lot, and I hope it didn't take too much time, and I'm happy to answer more questions if there are any, Sue.
I don't see any coming through now, but for those of you who want another handy dandy tool, especially with my little wizards in the behind the curtains watching, under your reactions button, there's also the ability to raise your hand. So if at any point you want to interrupt us and we're talking too fast, and you can't stop us and unmute and ask your question quickly enough, please also know that you can raise your hand, at least the digital Zoom version of raising your hand to ask a question. Unless I see hands popping up, and I'm sorry I can't see everybody on the screen all at once, we're going to move on to Lisa Millette. But please also know that at any point you can ask that question in the chat box, raise your hand, or just good old-fashioned unmute yourself and interrupt us. Lisa, I'm going to ask you to come off mute. You get the second question from this group. We had lots and lots of comments and questions. A very critical issue for the Cranberries is transportation. And I was wondering if you could give us an update on what we've done, other islands, other communities with Maine State Ferry Service, but also what other help you've already done or offered to the Cranberries and their ferry transportation, and even parking came up repeatedly. After you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at Island Institute.
Sue. Happy Tuesday evening, everyone. And it's great to see some familiar faces on the call tonight and some new faces that I'm connecting with, names that I've communicated with through email or the other technology that we've been relying on since these pandemic times and even before that. Also, I have Nick Batista, who's a wonderful coworker and who's been at the Island Institute much longer than I have, and has a greater depth of awareness. So if there's things that I'm not able to respond to, you also have him. So you're lucky you have two of us tonight. So I'm calling you tonight from Appleton. I've been working at the Island Institute for about 4.5 years. I actually started in Archipelago, which is the store that helps to support our creative economy and also is a launch pad and does mentorship for artists and makers, and moved into Island Institute's programming a little over 2 years ago. So I got to make that shift during the pandemic, which is also the time that we made a shift to focus in a little bit more on ferries and island transportation, largely because the pandemic made it very serious and very aware that if this critical piece of island transportation was to experience any hiccups due to the pandemic or otherwise, that would mean quite a bit for the island communities that rely on that transportation. So from that, we've started a couple different things, one of them being a ferry operators convening. We meet quarterly-ish. I say ish because we skip the summer months, knowing that that's the busiest time for our operators. And we meet quarterly-ish to talk about what are the hot spots. It was very different at the start of the pandemic. And there are some things that we're still hearing, especially with the public transportation mask mandate still being a thing. And some things that are newer, such as high winds and concerns of ferry operators of captains going out in high winds if they have to respond to an emergency. So lots of climate things we're hearing, lots of pandemic things that are still trickling on, even though we're in 2022. One thing that we're also hearing statewide and nationwide is finding reliable people to crew the vessels and keep the vessels running so that they don't have to make any cancellations and can keep folks going to and from mainland terminals to islands. So it's great to have that quarterly meeting to hear directly from the operators themselves and to understand what's going on real time, and for them to be able to have that space that they can hear from others what has worked for them and maybe can apply those solutions to their own transportation services, whether they're public, private, or a combination of the two. Second is that we just kicked off earlier this month a brand new study. We hired a consulting firm to work with Maine DOT and the Island Institute and to look at the future of the Maine State Ferry Service that serves 6 islands, not the Cranberry Isles, but 6 other islands. And we're doing a very deep dive into that, looking at ridership, looking at fares, looking at the different routes that the ferries take in order to then turn around and look into the future and say, what can we do better, not only budget-wise, but also islander service-wise, to make sure we're meeting the needs of the islanders within the budget of the state. And we're really hoping from that study, which will wrap up by the end of the calendar year, that there will be things that we can then turn around and share with the other operators outside of the Maine State Service. So Beal and Bunker, we would be able to share that with Beal and Bunker. We'd be able to share that with Stephen Pagels, and as well as the other operators up and down the coast of Maine, and potentially in other areas that we've also connected with. So we've talked with some ferry folks in Cape Cod, as well as the Great Lakes. So this is information that we're hoping to gain that will be able to spread just beyond the 6 islands served by the State Ferry Service. The last thing that we're doing is we're working to build a new program and a new team. And actually, I believe Jeff is on the call. So Jeff Frank is here, who's our new strategic lead of the business resilience team. And so we're working to build out different tools and plans and advising that can really help businesses look at their long-term plans, not only in economic resilience, but also in social and environmental resilience. So as Tony said, we rely on the Gulf of Maine, we rely on the resources from that. Climate resilience is something that our businesses need to include as they're thinking about the future of their businesses. But I did have a question come in directly to me from Kristen Howard while I was talking, asking specifically about the Cranberry Isles and the 2 ferry operators there. So what I can share is that we are keeping up to date on the different issues that are going on, which are quite different with Beal and Bunker, as well as the Cranberry Cove ferry service. And we're just staying up to date. So if there are spaces that we can jump in, we will absolutely do it. So we don't want to be left behind and then have to speed up to get aware of the issue. So yeah, I've talked to Steve Pagels about what he's experiencing and where we might be able to help support him. Last time we spoke, which was a few weeks ago, he said he's figuring some things out, but will give us a holler when he knows more and where he thinks we can lend our support, and have received a similar response from the 2 operators of Beal and Bunker. But happy to answer any other questions on that, if there are any.
I'm not seeing any hands go up. Sorry, I am trying to help Chris White get back in and out of waiting rooms and his technical stuff. I'm going to move on to our teammate, Nick Batista, who can come off mute. Lisa, I'm sure people are going to start thinking of other ferry transportation questions. And again, please feel free to use that chat box or just interrupt and ask your question. Nick, we got a lot of questions. Second most frequent question, I'm going to combine 2 topics into one. Not everybody and their registration information did this, but certainly at Island Institute, we relate workforce and affordable housing into affordable workforce housing, and they're very much interrelated. Some of the questions we heard from registration forms were about how to get more workers on the island. How do we increase both year-round workforce and seasonal workforce numbers, as well as housing, and then just good old-fashioned affordable housing on the islands. Can you share a little bit about who you are and what you do, as well a little bit about the work that we're doing on affordable workforce housing.
Sure, thank you. So hello, everybody. Nick Batista, the Chief Policy Officer at the Island Institute. Been here for a little over 10 years and have done policy for about half of that time and ran the marine programs for the other half. I think one of the more exciting things in the marine programs work that I did was helping friends fishermen and other folks get started in shellfish and seaweed aquaculture businesses. And I know I saw Lauren Gray on here earlier, and just exciting to see you, Lauren. I'm going to try to embarrass you here. Won't say anything further, but so on the terms of the housing front, we were in a meeting on Shabig the other night about housing, and one of the community members said, every island organization has a stake in this issue. This is about the future viability of our year-round community. And so, I think that sums up the connection between housing and island communities in particular. We know that access to workforce housing is an important and systemic issue for economic resilience. It's increasingly impacting the islands and the coast of Maine. I think some of the issues that islands have experienced over the years are probably issues that the coast will be experiencing in the next coming years. Being on an island, you're a little bit smaller geography to deal with, maybe not as much open space to expand to new houses, not as many options to say, oh, I can't afford a house here, I'll go live in the next community over, because then you're dealing with ferry logistics and all of that other fun stuff. So I think in a lot of ways, islands are at the forefront of understanding the possible futures for the coast. And the other thing that we recognize and know is that housing and changes in the availability of housing, escalating costs, the tight housing market, it's a series of concerns that are that span the coast. And in Camden, where I live, certainly housing is a hot topic of conversation. Rockland, same thing. We're hearing similar stories from people in southern Maine and even heading further east. In the last year, because of this, we've started exploring the right role that the Island Institute can play in housing conversations. And so in supporting a number of community conversations and doing that listening and learning, I think there are a couple of themes that have come out, and one is the need to really broaden and deepen the understanding of housing as an issue. So communities can start to grapple with the various aspects of the housing issue and ultimately address them. When we talk about housing, oftentimes people think it's just, affordable housing, or we talk about housing that is affordable. And in Maine, the affordable housing has it's a term of art. 80% of the area median income is the threshold for affordable housing in the state. But what we're really seeing in coastal communities is a very different set of challenges, which is around housing for people who live and work in the communities. And that isn't measured against area median income. It's measured, with people who are here and working and being in their community. It affects all aspects of a community, and not just those who have less means. And I think that's a huge change for the housing conversations. And so much of the resources and much of the work on housing in the last number of years statewide has been in that affordable housing context, not as much in this other housing challenge that is incredibly pressing for our communities as well. And so, I think there's a tension that's really tricky for communities to navigate between the fear of displacement. So if you live in a community and you can't afford to continue living there, that's pretty scary, or that's pretty scary if it's happening to your friends and neighbors. And then there's also a desire in many communities to be inclusive and to be welcoming to new people moving in. I know in the pandemic, there are many new faces who've showed up in coastal communities, bringing great energy and resources and having kids in the school. And so there's a tension there in this housing conversation that is very tricky for community leaders to be navigating. I think the other observation is local zoning bears directly on housing, and significant changes in local zoning laws can be divisive and drive communities apart. And so with all of that in mind, we're looking at working through these issues and building some strategies to address housing in our work for the next year. We've been looking at it, thinking about it, talking with people about it, and I think there are a few places where we can be working to support that workforce housing work that's happening in communities. Two other things of note that are happening soon, imminently, the housing bond that passed, I don't know, 2008 or 9, that led to some island communities getting some affordable housing. Maine Housing is on the cusp of relaunching that program. They're putting some more bond funds into that program. So there will be additional funds coming to island communities for affordable housing. And the legislature's been deeply working on a bill that would trigger a number of zoning changes across the communities in the state. And one of the big parts of that conversation is how much zoning change is being required versus how much support the state is providing to the smallest communities in adapting their zoning code and adopting new changes, because the state can say this is what the zoning is, and then every municipality has to go out and change their zoning laws and correspondence to. So that's a long way of saying there's a lot happening in the housing front and more to come. And, I think we very much appreciate hearing the specific instances, the specific issues that are popping up in island communities. Again, in part because I think they're helping us and the coast see what might be coming down the road.
Thanks, Nick. I did get a follow-up question from Peter and Elaine, and I think this might be Lisa and or Nick. Any thoughts on where the ferry service should or maybe could change or improve? Oh, and we've got another, we'll get that one first, and then I'll call on Sam, who's actually looks like Sam and somebody else. Sorry. Lisa, you want to talk about ferries real quick?
Sure. I wish Emma was on the call still, because certainly one of the ways that ferry systems can improve is to be able to control their operating costs as much as they can. We are in a difficult state right now because we have fuel costs that are changing quite drastically day to day. So to take some of those fuel costs out of the equation, it does require some larger capital funds to make that switch from a traditional diesel or gas powered engine to an electric or hybrid. But there is some funds that are coming down from the federal level for this. And I think it will be a space that will see funds either in grants or low interest loans in the near time future, because it is a shift that Maine is really leaning into. The other thing that can be done is to just increase transparency and communication, which I actually think both your ferry services do a decent job of. Visiting your Facebook page for the community, I often see posts from both ferry services letting folks know of delays, reasons for delays, when services might be back online. But the better the communication, and the greater the transparency, generally then usually the two parties, the operators and the folks using the ferry system, the better that whole relationship works. Something else that's technologically coming down the line are different ferry alert systems. So there's different apps and different things coming down the line that can allow for text message alerts. So if you are not a computer user, or you're not a Facebook user, to allow you to receive real-time text message alerts. So adoption of that type of technology in the user-friendly versions of those technologies are also coming down the line.
Sam, but Sam and I don't know who's Sam and who's someone else. You have your hand up.
Hi, I'm Emma.
Hi, Emma.
Hi.
Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Hi. So we're year-round residents on Little Cranberry. We work on Little Cranberry. We both work on lobster boats. And we are having an extremely hard time with housing. It's not even just finding affordable housing. There's no year-round rental options that we can even find. And then any rentals that come up in the summer are too expensive for us to afford. And then any houses that come onto the market are too expensive for us to buy. And, I don't know how to say this, but we're competing with people who have a lot more money than us. And we have friends on the call, Shippen and our friend Oliver, who are also looking to settle down here, and they also work on the island. And we're all concerned that if we can't find a place, we're going to have to leave. And that makes, I think, all of us scared for the future of the island in general. And I think this isn't just a problem on our island, but a lot of islands.
Right.
And the coast in general.
And just to add to that, I mean, it's I think Nick brought up a really good point about there being a distinction between affordable housing and housing that is available to people that are working on island communities. And for us, that rings true because, we're both fishermen and we make a good living fishing, but it's still the range of what's available here is just beyond our scope.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel that we have a lot to offer Little Cranberry. Emma has pretty deep roots in this community. Her family goes back several generations.
Yeah,
and
7.
she's 7 to be exact. And we love it here. And it's basically our lives revolve around this island. It's not like we could just pick up and go to MDI or go somewhere else. And we understand that this is a pretty entrenched problem, and that it might not be the burden of this might not be on any particular organization, but we would just like to kind of get involved in the conversation and see what we can figure out, because even if we find a solution to our problem, it seems that other young people who want to come out to islands like ours are going to face a lot of obstacles, and that makes it difficult for us to keep building and developing these sustainable workforces on our waterfront.
And I think that's the same, not almost word for word, the same story that's happening on Shabig right now too. Very similar. And I think that's part of what sparked Shabig to start having a community conversation about housing and rehave that conversation. I know, probably 15 to 20 years ago, getting families to move out to islands to keep school populations up was the really big issue that many communities were trying to solve for. I think it's a different set of issue these days, and in part for what you're raising, and I think we're seeing it in other places, that you might not even ever have a chance to raise a family on an island if there isn't any housing available. And for the people who want to live and work in these communities, it's challenging to find a place. And even if you have the advantages of having 7 generations of family history on the island, it's still challenging if you're coming from somewhere else, from a mainland community. Hard to, where do you even start?
So Nick, Ingrid, our go-to Ingrid, woman who wears so many hats and helped us put so many people in touch with this event tonight. Thank you, Ingrid. I won't call on you, or maybe you are over blushing, but she specifically asked if there are any other islands or other success stories we know of, or other communities thinking kind of out of the box thinking to help solve the problem. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but you're our housing guy, so I don't know if you have other examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think Monhegan has been dealing with a lot of facets of the housing issue for a number of years, particularly, they're in a place where many of the housing units on the island are seasonal. And so you have many people living year round in places that are seasonal. And so you're talking about like breaking the ice in the morning to use the toilet, things like that, that are pretty challenging. But that's where they are. So I think Monhegan is an interesting place. They've been dealing with this various housing issues for a number of years and have some ways through it. I think talking with Chevigue and the conversations that they're having is another good place. And then in the Mid-Coast, there's a group that's been looking at a community housing trust, which is the trust would own the land. And so you would get a 99-year lease to the house, could be transferred. There might be restrictions on transferring it for more than, an inflation escalator or something like that. So you're not you're not prohibiting transference of the house, but you're protecting it for certain demographics or keeping it open and available for the community. There are a couple of good options like that people are exploring across the state, and happy to put you in touch with those groups too. They've done a lot of benchmarking research on who's doing what in terms of other groups.
Yeah, I think the secret to the success on both Monhegan, I might be speaking out of turn here for that one, but certainly on Chevigue, is that it crosses all the socioeconomic demographic variables. It's the entire community coming together to solve the problem. And although they might not have the solutions yet, it is summer and full year-round residents. It's people who 7th generation on the island and people who've only been on the island for less than a year. It's the entire community coming together to solve the problem. And our role at Island Institute is to really facilitate those conversations, provide those resources, links, and just put folks in touch with other ideas and other people coming up with solutions. I think Nick's just offered to help put this group, if you have interest in doing something like that, in touch with those resources. And we can make sure that we ask that question specifically in our follow-up to see who on this call and maybe others might be interested in continuing that conversation. The conversation on Chevigue grew out of this community conversation as well, or their first community conversation. Judith, you have your hand up.
Unmute. Thank you, Emma, for that. I'm a summer resident on Little Cranberry Island, also on the board of the community Cranberry Island Realty Trust. So we are working on this issue. An interesting tension that or an interesting conundrum that we have on these islands, on our islands, is workforce housing for year-rounders like Emma and Shippen and everybody else that needs year-round housing, and increasing pressure for summer housing. We've got a Isles for Dock restaurant. They're always looking for summer residents. They bought up 3 houses already. They contend for the property. There's thought to maybe make some summer housing for the summer residents. For the summer workforce, summer workforce, it's very important. And it's, we need the summer economy for the island. We need the year-round economy. The housing needs are different and competing. So just putting that out there, we are involved in both those conversations, but they are competing. There are competing needs.
And I would say that, again, that's the same on Chevigue. The Chevigue Island Inn needs, housing for 20 workers on the island in the summer. They're there just the summer. It's an incredible challenge for the inn, and then it's also a challenge for the community.
So do we give priority to the year-round housing or to the summer island housing? Because there are houses that have gone up for sale, and they've gotten bought up for summer workforce housing.
And that's the community conversation. I think that's helpful to have. And I think the answer is both.
Obviously it's
doesn't
both.
work if it's just one or the other.
Yeah, no, it is.
Sam, Emma, I think you raised your hand again.
Yeah, I personally, I feel like I'm not as threatened, but no, I mean, I don't want to say threatened, but I guess I don't feel as if the summer workforce is what is making it difficult for us to find housing. I know now that the restaurant is all set with housing. They've built their own units on a property that they purchased. And the property that they had purchased previously was also an unfinished, uninsulated home. So I think it's more just, we have two very different socioeconomic groups looking to live on the same island, and there's just not really, it's very hard to compete when you are in a very different circumstance.
I'm in the awkward position of also noting the time here. I don't mean to cut you off, Emma. We are at time, and I think all of this conversation is pointing to the need to continue the conversation and call that group together, just like we did on Shabig, to make sure that you continue to have not only the resources and other solutions from other locations, but continue the conversation amongst each other, so that the community can choose the priorities and help cross those socioeconomic I won't say boundaries, but you have to bring the community together in order to come up with the right solution that works for the Cranberries. It's what we do. It's where Island Institute actually, it's our sweet spot. It's one of the things we do best. We didn't get to talk about other accomplishments and other areas of work. Please know that this is not the last and only community conversation we'll have. We will continue these community conversations. We'd love to get out there in person. I have been to Great Cran, I've been to Sutton. I'd love to stamp my island passport on other Cranberry Isles. And I know Tony especially would like to see some of you in person as time and travel with COVID restrictions and community comfort levels allow us to be there in person. Would love to do that in person as well.
Oh yeah. Nice.
Oh yeah. So we will continue these conversations, especially around special issues like affordable housing, especially in our follow-up. We'll try to find a way to make sure that we're convening those interested in continuing that conversation, as well as share some other upcoming policy issues and updates from Nick, our work on the ferry service, Main State Ferry Service, and what the Cranberries might learn from Main State Ferry Service and other islands, lots of other follow-up. As you say goodnight to each other, I would ask you for one thing. Clearly, housing was over and over again the #1 priority. You can type that in the chat box if you'd like to, but I'd like to ask you to depart with telling us, Island Institute, what is the one issue, and maybe it's something other than housing, what's the one issue where you can see your Cranberry Isles community collaborating with Island Institute? What is the one issue you want Island Institute top of mind as we continue to work with your communities? And with that, because we will record all of these, I just would like to say thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you again for all of the questions. Special thanks to Ingrid and Kristen, who shared this with friends and Facebook groups and others to make sure that we got the folks here that we got registered tonight. And we will be following up with you via email and another invitation very soon to gather again. Thank you, and keep those suggestions coming in that chat box as you sign off.